Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unsaid Hours. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable, take a deep breath, and let's begin. Stop. Before you close your eyes tonight, you need to hear this. The woods are not safe. I know what they told you. Fresh air, nature, peace and quiet, good for the soul. Take a hike, go camping, disconnect from the world and reconnect with something real. That is a lie. The people who say that have never been deep enough. They have never been far enough from the trailhead, far enough from the road, far enough from the last point where someone would hear them if they screamed. They have never been out there at 2 a.m. when the sounds that are supposed to be animal sounds stop making sense. They have never stood at the entrance of their tent and looked into the dark between the trees and understood with every single cell in their body that something in that dark was looking back. I am not talking about bears. I am not talking about mountain lions. I am talking about the thing that rangers will not put in their reports. The thing that search and rescue workers mention only to each other late at night after the families have gone home and the cameras are off. The thing that experienced hikers, people who have spent decades in the wilderness, people who know every sound a forest makes, people who are not easily frightened, come back from the deep woods and cannot explain, but also cannot forget. 10 people are going to tell you what they found out there. 10 people who went into the mountains and the deep woods and came back changed, not dramatically changed, not broken, not hospitalized, just changed in the specific quiet way of someone who has learned something about the world that they cannot unlearn. Something that the world, in its comfortable daylight version, would prefer you did not know. The forests cover 30% of the Earth's land surface. 30%. And we have explored almost none of it. Not really. The trails are thin lines through something enormous. The campgrounds are small lit circles in a darkness that goes on for hundreds of miles in every direction. Everything we think we know about what lives in those woods. Everything in the textbooks and the field guides and the nature documentaries is based on what has been willing to be seen. What has not been willing to be seen is a different question entirely. These 10 people accidentally got the answer. They are going to share it with you now. Turn off your lights, pull your blanket up, and whatever you do not look at the window if you are near any trees. Some things are better not confirmed. This is where the stories begin. Story 1. The ranger stopped filing reports. Derek spent 19 years as a park ranger in a national forest in the Pacific Northwest. 19 years of trails and wildlife and weather and the particular satisfaction of work that happens mostly outdoors and mostly alone. He loved the job. He was good at the job. He knew his territory the way that people who spend years in one landscape know it. Not just the trails and the landmarks, but the personality of the place. The way it felt, different in seasons and at different hours. The specific quality of its silences. He stopped filing certain reports in his 14th year. Not because he stopped observing things, because he had observed enough to understand that filing the reports accomplished nothing except a conversation with his supervisors that he did not want to have again. He had that conversation 3 times in his first 5 years, and each time it had ended with his supervisor looking at him with the expression that people wear when they are trying to be kind about something they consider embarrassing, and a note in his file about stress and isolation and the importance of taking his allocated leave days. So he stopped filing the reports. He kept his own records instead, a private notebook, separate from everything official, in which he wrote down what he actually observed in language that did not have to survive contact with a supervisor or a filing system. He has been writing in this notebook for 5 years, and it has 340 pages. He is willing to share some of what is in it. The first entry that matters, the one that started the private notebook, was from June of his 14th year. He was doing a routine trail check on a section of the park that saw moderate visitor traffic in summer, the kind of trail that was popular enough to be worth maintaining, but remote enough that the people who used it were experienced hikers rather than day trippers. He was about 7 miles from the nearest trailhead, which put him well past the point where casual visitors typically turned back. He found a campsite that had been abandoned, not unusual in itself. People set up camps and move on, sometimes without leaving much trace, sometimes leaving more. This campsite had a tent still standing, which was unusual. Tents are expensive, and people do not typically abandon functioning tents. The tent was a good one, a 4-season model, the kind that serious wilderness campers buy and take care of. It was staked properly, and the rainfly was attached correctly, and it was by every external indication fine. He called out. No response. He checked the surrounding area, the standard check for signs of injury or distress. Nothing. He opened the tent. Everything was inside. The sleeping bag, unzipped and slightly rumpled, the way it looks when someone has gotten up in the night and not made it back. A backpack with its contents organized and undisturbed. Food in a bare canister, properly sealed. A headlamp on the tent floor. A journal open to a page that had been written on. He read the journal. He will not reproduce what it said in detail because the family of the person who wrote it deserves their privacy, and because the specifics are not the point. The point is what it described in the final entry, written in handwriting that was clear and coherent at the start and became less so as it went on. Not from panic exactly, but from something that looked like a person trying very hard to describe something they did not have words for. The writer had heard something outside the tent. Not an animal sound. They were specific about this, had clearly anticipated that whoever read this might assume animal, and had addressed it directly. They knew animal sounds. They had been camping in wilderness areas for 15 years, and they knew what bears sounded like, and what elk sounded like, and what coyotes sounded like, and what the wind did in different kinds of trees. This was not any of those things. They described it as a sound that had intention in it. That was the phrase they used, and Derek has thought about it many times since. A sound with intention, not random, not the product of wind or weather, or an animal going about its animal business. Something that seemed to know where the tent was and was making a sound that was, in some way, he could not define, directed at the tent. The final line of the journal entry said, "I am going to open the zipper now." The tent zipper was open when Derek found it. The hiker was never found. Derek filed the standard missing person report and assisted with the search, and the search found nothing and was eventually called off. He wrote a separate account in his private notebook that night, his first entry, and at the top of the page, he wrote a question that has been at the top of every entry since. The question is, what opens the zipper from the outside? He has 19 years of the forest, and he does not have an answer. He has 340 pages of things that do not have answers. He keeps writing. Story 2, The Trail Cama. Lisa and her husband set up trail cameras on their property, which borders a large wilderness area in Montana. They set them up for the same reason most people in that situation set up trail cameras: to see what wildlife was moving through, to monitor the tree line, to have the particular pleasure of reviewing footage and finding deer and elk and the occasional bear living their lives in the dark while the humans inside the house were sleeping. They got what they were looking for about 8 months. Then they got something else. The cameras were motion activated and connected to a system that sent clips to Lisa's phone when triggered. She had become accustomed to waking up to a small collection of overnight clips. The deer were most active between 2 and 4 in the morning, reliable as a clock, and she had developed a fondness for the specific grace of them moving through the camera frame in the green-tinged night vision. On a Thursday in November, she woke up to 47 clips. This was unusual. The most she had ever received in a single night was maybe 15. On a night when a small herd had been moving through and had triggered the cameras multiple times, 47 suggested either a malfunction or something that had been moving past the cameras repeatedly over the course of the night. She went through the clips in order. The first 20 or so showed nothing she could identify. The cameras had triggered, but whatever triggered them was not in the frame. Motion at the edge of the detection zone, she assumed. Something small moving in the brush just outside the camera's view. She noted it and kept going. Clip 23 showed something in the frame. She stopped. She went back and played it again. The clip was 4 seconds long, the standard clip length when motion was detected. In those 4 seconds, at the right edge of the frame, there was a shape. She could not immediately identify it. She enlarged the image, which degraded the quality of the night vision footage, but brought the shape closer, and she looked at it for a long time. It was tall, very tall, standing at the tree line in a posture that was, and this is the word she kept coming back to when she talked about it, patient, not frozen in the way an animal freezes when it senses a camera or a presence. Patient in the way of something that has been standing there for a while and intends to stand there for a while longer. The shape was there in clip 23. It was closer in clip 29. In clip 34, it was at the edge of the yard, no longer at the tree line, having covered perhaps 60 feet of open ground in the time between the two clips. The camera had not triggered in between, which meant either it had moved during a gap in the detection, or it had moved in a way that did not trigger motion detection, which should not have been possible for something that size. In clip 41, it was standing directly in front of the camera. Lisa has described this clip many times to many people, and she says every time that the description never captures what it actually felt like to watch. The shape was close enough to fill most of the frame. She still could not identify it. The night vision gave it a greenish cast that flattened details, and whatever it was seemed to absorb the infrared light rather than reflect it, which is why the image was so poor even this close. It stood in front of the camera for the full 4 seconds of the clip. She cannot say with certainty that it was looking at the camera. She cannot say with certainty that it was not. Clips 42 through 47 showed the yard and the tree line empty, the shape gone, the cameras triggering on what was probably wind in the grass after whatever it was had left. She showed the footage to her husband that morning. He watched it twice without saying anything. Then he said he was going to check the yard. He found tracks, large tracks in the soft mud near the camera, not matching any animal either of them could identify. Too large for a bear, the wrong shape for anything they could find in any field guide. spaced in a way that suggested something bipedal, something that walked upright, with a stride length that was significantly longer than a human stride. They still have the footage. They still have photographs of the tracks. They upgraded their perimeter lighting that same week. They have not reviewed trail camera footage at night since. They review it in the morning together with the lights on and the doors locked. And the particular carefulness of people who have learned that seeing what is in the footage is better done with other people present and a full day of light ahead. Story 3. The Search and Rescue Volunteer. Tom has been a search and rescue volunteer in the Rocky Mountain region for 11 years. He has participated in over 200 search operations, found people and not found people, been in the mountains in every season and every kind of weather, operated in terrain that ranges from difficult to genuinely dangerous. He is a practical man. The work requires it. Search and rescue does not have room for the kind of imagination that turns shadows into threats or strange sounds into anything other than what the mountains produce in abundance. Strange sounds. He has been in enough genuinely dangerous situations to have calibrated his threat responses well. He knows the difference between fear, that is useful information, and fear, that is noise. What happened on the search in October was not noise. They were looking for a missing hiker, a man in his 50s who had gone out on a day hike and not come back. Standard missing person search, the kind that SAR runs regularly, with a defined search area based on the hiker's last known location and the terrain he was likely to have covered. Tom was working a grid in the northeast section of the search area, a heavily forested section with dense undergrowth and limited visibility, the kind of terrain where you can be 20 feet from someone and not see them. He had been in his grid for about 3 hours, moving methodically, when he noticed that the forest had gone quiet. This happens. There are explanations for it. A predator moving through the area can quiet the birds and the small animals. A change in weather can do it. His own presence, if he had been moving noisily, could do it. He noted it and kept moving. Then he heard the sound. He has tried many times to describe the sound and has settled on saying it was like breathing but wrong. Rhythmic, the way breathing is rhythmic, with an inhale quality and an exhale quality. But the scale of it was wrong, too large for any animal he knew of, and the location of it was wrong. It seemed to come from above him, from the canopy level, which ruled out most ground-dwelling animals and made no sense for the ones that lived in trees. He stopped. He looked up. He saw nothing in the trees above him. The canopy was dense and the light was low, and there was nothing visible that should not have been there. The breathing sound, or whatever it was, stopped at the same moment he stopped moving. He stood completely still for a long time. 2 minutes, maybe 3. The forest was completely quiet around him. He was aware of his own heartbeat in a way that he was not usually aware of it in the field. A sign, he recognized, that his body had assessed something as a threat before his conscious mind had caught up. He made the decision to move out of the grid, not run. He is a professional, and he did not run. He walked at a normal pace on a direct line toward the nearest trail, keying his radio and reporting to the team coordinator that he was repositioning due to terrain difficulty, which was true enough and which did not require him to say anything else. He was about 400 meters from the trail when he heard it behind him. Not the breathing sound. Footsteps. Bipedal, heavy, moving through the undergrowth with a weight that was significantly more than his own. At a distance he estimated at about 100 meters and decreasing. He increased his pace. The footsteps increased their pace. He reached the trail and turned onto it, and walked quickly in the direction of the staging area, and the footsteps stopped at the edge of the trail, at the point where the undergrowth met the open path, and did not follow him onto the trail. He has thought about this detail many times. The stopping at the trail edge, the not following onto the open path, the choice, if it was a choice, to stay in the undergrowth. The missing hiker was found 2 days later in a different section of the search area, alive and disoriented, with no memory of the previous 36 hours. He is well and has recovered fully, and Tom has never spoken to him about what happened in the northeast grid. Tom volunteers for searches in that area regularly. He has never been assigned that specific grid again. He has not requested it. He is not sure if he would take it if it were offered. He is not sure if he would decline it either. Story 4. The Fire Lookout. Megan spent 2 summers working as a fire lookout in a remote tower in a national forest in Idaho. The job is exactly what it sounds like. You live alone in a tower in the wilderness, and you watch for smoke. You are alone for weeks at a time. The nearest road is miles away. The nearest other person is further than that. Your contact with the outside world is a radio and a supply drop every 2 weeks. She loved it. She had applied for the position specifically because of the solitude, because she was at a point in her life where solitude felt like exactly what she needed. And the forest provided it in quantities that were more than sufficient. She read books, and she watched the sky, and she learned the landscape in every kind of light, and she was at peace with herself in a way that she had not been before. She was at peace until the middle of August of the second summer. She started noticing the same thing every night at the same time. At approximately 2 in the morning, she would wake up, not gradually, not in the way you surface slowly from sleep and lie for a while in the warm space between sleeping and being fully awake. Abruptly, completely, eyes open, fully conscious, the transition from sleep to waking happening in an instant. She would lie in her cot in the lookout tower, and she would listen. The forest at 2 in the morning had a sound she had come to know well over 2 summers. Not silence. The forest is never truly silent, but a specific collection of sounds, the insects and the occasional distant animal, the wind, if there was wind, the settling of the tower structure in temperature changes. She knew this sound catalog intimately. In the middle of August, it began to be wrong. Wrong is the only word she has for it. Not that the sounds were different in any way she could specifically identify. Just wrong in the aggregate, the collection of sounds slightly off from what it should have been. The way a chord is wrong when one note is just slightly flat. Not wrong enough to identify immediately, but wrong enough that something in you registers it before your conscious mind catches up. She started going to the window at 2 in the morning. The tower had windows on all 4 sides, which was the point. 360-degree visibility for spotting smoke. She would stand at each window in turn and look out at the forest below the tower and at the mountain slopes above it and at the sky. On the 14th night of this, she saw the lights, not fire. She knew what fire looked like from the tower at night, had seen small fires and had reported them and knew their character. The orange flickering quality of them, the way smoke showed even before. Flame was visible, the smell that reached even the tower in the right wind. These lights were not orange. They were pale, almost blue-white, moving between the trees at the base of the slope below the tower, moving in a pattern that was not random. Back and forth, methodical, the way a person moves when they are searching for something. But there was no one down there, no authorized personnel, no researchers, no scheduled activity in this section of the forest. She reported it on the radio. The response was a pause and then a confirmation that there was no authorized activity in that area and a note that she should log it and continue monitoring. She logged it. The lights came back the following night and the night after, always at the same hour, always the same pale blue-white, always the same methodical searching pattern. On the 18th night, she counted 6 of them. She has finished her time as a fire lookout. She loved the work, and she is glad she did it, and she would recommend it to anyone who genuinely wants solitude and the specific education in themselves that solitude provides. She would tell them to pay attention to what wakes them up at 2 in the morning. She would tell them to look out all 4 windows. She would tell them that if they see lights that are not fire, they should log them and continue monitoring. And she would tell them to keep their radio close. Story 5. The Hunters. This account comes from 2 men, brothers named Carl and Pete, who have been hunting together in a wilderness area in Wisconsin since they were teenagers. They are in their 40s now, experienced hunters who know the terrain they hunt, who have been in those woods in every season and every kind of weather, who have the specific, deep familiarity with a place that comes from returning to it year after year for decades. They are not men who spook easily. They say this themselves, without bravado, as a simple statement of fact. They have been in situations in the woods that required calm, and they have been calm. They know what they know, and they are honest about what they do not know. They do not know what they encountered in the 2nd week of deer season 3 years ago. They were in a blind before dawn, the standard pre-dawn setup of serious deer hunters, in position and settled before the sky began to lighten in the east. The morning was cold and clear, and the woods around them were doing what the woods do in the pre-dawn, the sounds of the night beginning to give way to the first bird sounds, the transition of the forest from its nighttime self to its daytime self. Carl heard it first. Something moving through the brush to the north of their position, moving toward them. He registered it the way hunters register all movement in the woods, with full attention, with the assessment of size and direction and distance that decades of sitting quietly in blinds develops into something close to automatic. The movement was heavy. Whatever was making it was large. It was moving steadily, not the erratic stop-start movement of deer or the ambling of a bear, but steadily, with a regularity that reminded Carl, though he did not say this until later, of footsteps. He touched Pete's arm. Pete was already listening. The movement stopped about 30 yards north of their position. They sat completely still. This is what you do in a blind. You stay still. You wait. You let whatever is out there reveal itself or move on. They were good at this. They had years of practice at this. Whatever was to the north of them did not reveal itself and did not move on. For 40 minutes, it stood in the brush 30 yards north of their position and made no sound and no movement. They could not see it through the brush in the pre-dawn dark. They could not hear it. They could only know it was there in the way that hunters know things are there, through the absence of the other sounds that would have resumed if it had left. The birds did not start their morning sounds. In 40 minutes of pre-dawn, in a Wisconsin forest in deer season, the birds did not start. Carl and Pete know what it means when the birds do not start. It means something is out there that the birds are not comfortable with. They have experienced this before with bears and with other things, and they know how to read it. What they did not know was what to do with a thing that stood 30 yards north of them for 40 minutes without moving, and this is the part they tell last, the part they have most trouble with, was simply not there, when the light finally came up enough to see the brush clearly. Not gone in the way that animals go, with sound, with movement, with the evidence of departure, simply not there in the space where it had been. The brush undisturbed. No tracks in the soft earth at the edge of the clearing they checked afterward. No evidence of 40 minutes of presence. They hunted the rest of that season. They have hunted every season since. They do not set up in that particular area anymore. They have never discussed between themselves what they think it was. Some things are understood between brothers without being said. Story 6. The Overnight Backpacker. Rachel has been backpacking since she was 12 years old. Her parents took her and her siblings into the wilderness every summer, and she caught the specific fever of it that some people catch and never recover from. The need for the weight of a pack and the simplicity of the trail and the particular quality of sleep that comes from being genuinely exhausted in the open air under a sky full of stars. She is 34 now, and she has logged more nights in the wilderness than she can accurately count. And she has had the full range of experiences that the wilderness provides, including genuinely frightening ones. A close encounter with a black bear, a night pinned in a shelter by a storm that was more serious than the forecast had suggested, a navigation error in unfamiliar terrain that had her genuinely lost for several hours before she sorted it out. She knows wilderness fear. She knows what it is and where it comes from and how to manage it. What happened on the John Muir Trail last summer was not a kind of fear she had experienced before. She was 4 days into a solo section hike, camped at a lake at elevation, the kind of campsite that takes significant effort to reach and rewards that effort with the specific beauty of high-altitude wilderness, the clarity of the air, the color of the water, the quality of the silence. She woke at approximately 1 in the morning. No particular reason, not a sound, not a movement, not any external stimulus she could identify. She was simply awake, suddenly and completely, the way she had not been awake since she was a child and believed in things under the bed. She lay in her sleeping bag and listened. The lake was outside her tent, maybe 30 feet from her tent door. She could hear it, the small sound of water and the particular acoustic quality that open water gives to a campsite. The way it makes the silence around it slightly larger than it would otherwise be. Something was at the lake. She knew this before she could explain how she knew it. The knowledge arrived fully formed without the usual process of observation and inference. Something was at the lake and it was large and it was aware of her tent. She did not move for a long time. Eventually, because she is the kind of person she is, and because not knowing felt worse than knowing, she unzipped her sleeping bag. She put on her headlamp, but did not turn it on. She unzipped the tent door, slowly, quietly, the way you unzip a tent when you are trying not to make the sound of the zipper. She looked out. The lake was 30 feet away, the surface of it pale in the starlight, perfectly still. The shore between her tent and the water was open ground, easy to see across in the starlight. She saw what was at the lake. She has described this many times, and each time she says the same thing at this point, which is that she is not going to tell you exactly what she saw, because she has thought about it for a year, and she still does not have language for it that she trusts, that she believes is accurate, rather than shaped by what she has subsequently read and heard and thought about. She is a careful person. She does not want to describe it wrong. What she will say is this: it was at the water's edge. It was large. It was aware of her in the specific way of something that had been aware of her before she was aware of it. And when she turned on her headlamp, the moment the beam hit the shore, it was gone. not fled, not startled away, gone. In the instant between the dark and the light, she has been back to the wilderness since. She is back there regularly. She will not stop going, but she does not camp solo at lakeside campsites anymore. And she does not turn on her headlamp anymore without being prepared for what the light might show her, and what it might not show her anymore. Story 7. The Trail Runner. Marcus runs trails. Has been running trails for 8 years, long distances through wilderness areas. The kind of running that takes you deep into places that most people only see from trailheads. He is fast and experienced, and he has run thousands of miles of trail in dozens of different wilderness areas across the country. He is aware that trail running alone in remote areas involves real risks. He takes these seriously. He carries what he is supposed to carry. He tells people where he is going. He knows his limits, and he respects them. He does not run that particular trail anymore. The trail goes through a section of old-growth forest in Oregon, the kind of forest where the trees are so large and so old that the scale of them changes the quality of the light, makes the midday sun into something dim and green and cathedral-like. He had run it many times. It was one of his favorites. He was running it on a morning in early spring, the kind of morning that is cold enough that his breath made visible clouds in the air, and the trail was still firm from the overnight freeze. He was about 12 miles in, which put him well into the old-growth section when he became aware of being followed. This is not an unusual feeling for solo trail runners in wilderness areas, and he knew how to assess it. He slowed. He looked behind him. He saw nothing on the trail. He checked the trees on either side. Nothing. He stopped completely and stood still and listened. The forest was quiet in the specific way. It is quiet in old growth, a weighted silence, a silence that has depth to it. He kept running. The feeling did not go away. He is a person who trusts his body's assessments. Years of running have given him a refined relationship with his own physical signals, the ability to distinguish between discomfort that is just discomfort and discomfort that is information. This was information. He increased his pace. Something in the trees to his left matched his pace. He could not see it. He could hear it, barely, at the edge of hearing, the sound of something moving through the undergrowth parallel to the trail, keeping pace. Not crashing through as a startled animal would, moving with a deliberateness that matched his own deliberateness, that increased when he increased, and settled when he settled. He ran faster than he had intended to run that day. He ran faster than was comfortable on that terrain. He came out of the old growth section at the far end of the trail, where the forest opened up and the trail became a fire road for the last 2 miles, and whatever had been moving in the trees beside him stopped at the edge of the old growth and did not follow him into the open. He ran the fire road at full speed. He got to his car. He sat in his car for a while. He has run many trails since. He runs most of them without incident. He loves the running, and he loves the wilderness, and he will not give either of them up. He does not run that trail anymore. Not because he is afraid of it. He says this carefully. Not because he is afraid of it. Because he has decided that the old growth section of that trail has something in it that he disturbed by running through it, and that the respectful thing to do is to not disturb it again. He is a practical man, but he is also a thoughtful one. He thinks respect is practical in the end. He keeps running. Story 8. The Geologist. Dr. Elaine studies rocks, specifically the kind of geology that requires fieldwork in remote mountain areas. The reading of what the Earth has done over millions of years, as written in the exposed faces of cliffs and the composition of riverbeds, and the structures that long, slow forces have built in places that are difficult to get to. She has spent much of her career in exactly the kinds of places that are difficult to get to. She is practical and methodical, and she approaches problems the way geologists approach rock formations, by looking the evidence and letting the evidence determine the conclusion rather than the other way around. She does not have a conclusion for what she experienced in a mountain range in Colorado 3 years ago. She was doing solo fieldwork in a high elevation area, mapping rock formations, the kind of work that requires concentration and physical effort in equal measure, and that she finds deeply satisfying. She was working a section of exposed cliff face at about 11,000 feet elevation, the air thin and clear, and the view from that height extraordinary. She found the marks at midday, on the cliff face at approximately 9 feet above the ground, above where any person could reach without equipment. There were marks in the rock, not natural marks, not the scoring and scratching that geological processes produce. Marks that had been made deliberately by something that was applying pressure in a pattern. She photographed them and took measurements and documented them with the same thoroughness she brought to her professional work, because that is who she is, and those are her habits. She then thought about the height, 9 feet. Nothing in this region, no known animal, produced marks of this kind at this height. The marks were recent. She could tell from the weathering and the state of the surrounding rock that they had not been there long, months at most. Something had reached 9 feet up a vertical cliff face and made these marks. She is a geologist. She deals in evidence. She documented the evidence, and she has the photographs and the measurements, and she has shown them to colleagues who have not been able to explain them either, and who she notices change the subject fairly quickly after looking at them. She still does field work in remote mountain areas. The work requires it, and she loves the work. She pays more attention to cliff faces now, not because she expects to find more marks, because she is a scientist, and scientists look at things, and the marks are real and documented things deserve attention. She looks. Story 9. The Overnight Camp Counselor. This story is different from the others because it involves children, and because Jess, who tells it, is very careful about how she tells it for that reason. She was a camp counselor for 3 summers at a wilderness camp for teenagers in the Appalachian Mountains. The camp ran overnight hiking trips into the backcountry, multi-day trips with groups of 8 to 10 teenagers and 2 counselors, and Jess led many of these trips in her 3 summers there. She loved the work. She was good with teenagers, and she was good in the wilderness, and the combination of the two, watching young people encounter the natural world and respond to it, was something she found consistently meaningful. On the second overnight trip of her second summer, something happened that she has not spoken about publicly until now. They were camped at a site 3 miles from the nearest road. A group of 9 teenagers and Jess and her co-counselor, a young man named Ben. The evening had gone, as these evenings usually went. Dinner, campfire, the gradual winding down of teenage energy as the miles of the day caught up with everyone. And by 10 o'clock, the whole group was in their tents and quiet. Jess took the first watch. Standard procedure on overnight trips. One counselor awake while the other rested, rotating through the night. She sat at the edge of the campfire and let it burn down and watched the dark and listened. At approximately midnight, she heard one of the tent zippers, a teenager getting up for the bathroom, the most common midnight campsite sound. She waited for the figure to emerge from the tents and head for the designated area, and she watched the tent line. No one came out. She heard the zipper again, the sound of it unzipping completely. She went to the tents and checked each one. All 9 teenagers were in their sleeping bags. All zippers were closed. She checked the perimeter of the campsite with her flashlight. At the edge of the light, at the point where the beam gave out and the dark began, she saw a shape that she could not identify. It was gone before she could look at it directly, in the way that things at the edge of vision sometimes are, present in peripheral sight and absent when you turn to face them directly. She woke Ben. They did not tell the teenagers anything. They sat together through the rest of the night, both awake, and the night passed without further incident. And in the morning, they broke camp and led the group back to the main camp without incident, and without telling anyone what had happened. She thinks about those teenagers sometimes. She hopes they slept well that night. She hopes whatever was at the edge of the campfire light had no interest in them. She thinks it did not. She thinks whatever was there was curious about the fire, about the light in the dark, in the way that certain things are curious about human fires in the wilderness. She thinks it is better not to know exactly what those things are. She still loves the wilderness. She still leads trips. She keeps the fire burning a little later than the guidelines require. Just a little. Story 10. The one went back. This is the last story, and it is the strangest one, and it belongs to a man named Daniel, who went into the mountains of northern Montana alone, and came back 3 days later, and has been trying to explain what happened to him ever since. He went in a skeptic. He says this clearly at the start, every time he tells the story, because it matters to him that you understand what kind of person he was when he entered those mountains. He was the kind of person who had opinions about the kind of people who told stories like the ones in this collection. He was the kind of person who had the word credulous ready for those people. He was educated and rational, and he had a framework for the world that did not include things that could not be explained. And he was comfortable in that framework. He is no longer comfortable in it. He went in for a 3-day solo backpacking trip, a route he had researched and planned carefully, appropriate for his experience level, no technical terrain, manageable distances. He had done similar trips before. He was not doing anything reckless. On the second night, at approximately 3 in the morning, he woke up. He was in his tent, and the tent was fine, and his gear was fine, and the campsite was fine, and there was nothing wrong in any observable way, except that he knew, with a certainty that he cannot account for, and that contradicts everything he believed about how knowledge works, that he was being shown something, not shown in the sense of a vision or a hallucination, in the sense that information was being delivered to him by something outside himself, something that was present in the dark outside his tent, and that was communicating in a way that bypassed language and image and went directly to understanding. He lay in his tent for 2 hours and received this information. He will not say what it was, not because he has forgotten it. He has not forgotten it. It is the clearest thing he knows, clearer than anything he learned in school or in his career or in his adult life. He will not say it because he has tried on many occasions to translate it into language, and the translation is always wrong, always reductive, always loses the essential thing. And he has decided that something that loses its meaning in translation is better not translated. He says one thing about it. He says it changed the frame, not the content of his life, his relationships, his work, his daily existence, the frame, the thing around everything, the assumption about what the world is and what is in it. and what the mountains and the deep forests contain in the dark hours when most people are asleep, and the people who are awake are keeping their fires burning a little later than the guidelines recommend. He went back into those mountains the following summer. He went back to the same campsite. He camped there for one night. He woke at 3 in the morning. He lay in his tent. He listened. He received nothing. The mountains were just mountains. The dark was just dark. Whatever had been present the first time was not present this time, or was present and had said what it had to say and was done saying it. He packed up in the morning and hiked out. He is not sure whether to be relieved or sorry. He is not sure. Those are different things. 10 stories, 10 people, 10 nights in the mountains and the deep woods, where something happened that changed them in the specific quiet way of people who have learned something about the world they cannot unlearn. The forests are still out there. 30% of the Earth's surface, covering more than most people will ever walk through in a lifetime, holding whatever they hold in the dark. The trails are thin lines through something enormous. You are not on them tonight. You are exactly where you are, in a safe and ordinary place. And the dark around you is the dark of a room and a house and a street and a neighborhood, the layered, ordinary dark of human habitation. The mountains are somewhere else. What is in them is somewhere else. Close your eyes. Let the wilderness be the wilderness tonight. Sleep well. There is one more thing Derek wants to say about the private notebook and the 340 pages in it. He says that in 19 years of being in the forest, in all the time he has spent alone in wilderness areas at all hours, including the hours when most people are not in wilderness areas, he has developed a sense that he cannot quantify and cannot put in any official report, but that he trusts because it has been consistent and because it has never been wrong. The sense is this: the forest is aware. Not in any way he can explain scientifically, not in the sense of a single consciousness or any kind of organized intelligence that could be mapped or studied in a different sense, a sense that the forest as a system, as the accumulated presence of everything in it over all the years it has existed, has a kind of awareness that registers the presence of people who move through it, that it notices. He has felt noticed for 19 years. Most of the time the noticing is neutral. He is in the forest, and the forest registers him, and they coexist, and nothing particular comes of the noticing. He does his job, and the forest does what forests do, and that is the end of it. But sometimes the noticing has a different quality. Sometimes what he feels is not neutral awareness, but something more directed. Something that feels less like a landscape registering a presence, and more like something specific. Something with its own agenda, turning its attention toward him. Those are the days he checks his radio. Those are the days he tells someone where he is going. Those are the days he comes back before dark. He has 19 years of this, and he is 61 years old, and he intends to work until he cannot anymore. And then he will retire, and he will still go into the forest, because the forest is part of who he is now, after 19 years, inextricable. But he will always tell someone where he is going. He will always come back before dark. He will always trust the feeling. The notebook has 340 pages. He is still writing. Lisa wants to add something to her account of the trail camera footage that she did not include in the initial telling because she was not sure it was relevant, and has since decided that it is. After the night of the 47 clips, after she and her husband had reviewed the footage and found the tracks and upgraded the perimeter lighting, she went back to the camera system and reviewed all the footage from the previous 8 months. She was looking for anything she might have missed. Any earlier appearance of the shape, any indication that it had been around before November. She found it, not in the same form, not standing at the tree line or crossing the yard, but in 14 clips spread across the 8 months. The cameras had triggered and recorded what appeared to be empty footage. And in 3 of those clips, when she enlarged and enhanced the image at the very edge of the frame, at the outermost limit of what the camera could record, there was something, a darkness within the darkness, a shape that was not a tree and not a deer and not anything she had a name for, present at the edge of the camera's reach, watching the yard from a distance. 8 months of watching before it moved closer, before it came to stand in front of the camera and fill the frame. She has thought about this for a long time. The patience of it, the 8 months of watching from a distance before approaching. The decision to approach at all after 8 months of staying back. She does not know what changed. She does not know what made November different from the 8 months before it. She does not want to know. She replaced the trail cameras with a different model, a model with a longer range and higher resolution. She tells herself this is practical, that better cameras mean better wildlife documentation. She has not reviewed the new footage as carefully as she reviewed the old. She is not sure she wants to find something in it. She is not sure she would not. She keeps the perimeter lights on, all night, every night. Tom, the search and rescue volunteer, has one more thing to say about the northeast grid and the footsteps that stopped at the trail edge. He went back to that section, not on a search, on his own time, on a clear autumn day when the light was good and the conditions were safe, and he had told 3 people exactly where he was going and when to expect him back. He walked the grid he had been working the day of the search. He walked it methodically, the same pattern, covering the same ground. He was looking for tracks, for any physical evidence of what had been in the undergrowth behind him. He found something, not tracks. The ground cover was too dense for clear tracks, and the time that had passed since the search had allowed whatever impressions there might have been to recover. But he found broken branches at intervals along a line that paralleled the trail he had been walking, broken at a height that was higher than a deer's shoulder and in a pattern that suggested something moving through the undergrowth rather than browsing in it. The broken branches stopped at the trail edge, exactly where the footsteps had stopped. He stood at the trail edge and looked into the undergrowth, and the undergrowth looked back, in the way that undergrowth looks back. When you are paying close enough attention to the difference between a landscape that is empty and a landscape that only appears empty. He walked back to his car. He told the 3 people he had told where he was going that he was back and that everything was fine. He does not have an explanation for the broken branches. He has thought about what could have made them at that height in that pattern, and he has not come up with an answer that satisfies him. He has the branches photographed on his phone. He does not look at the photographs often. He looks at them sometimes. He is not sure what he is looking for when he does. He thinks he is just checking that they are still there, that they were real, that what happened in the northeast grid was real. It is. He knows it is. That is the part he lives with.